but things didn't go as planned.
Yeah.
I ended up almost dying, and the probability was very slim of me not coming out of there with or without a baby. What would have happened to my child? Would they have carried on having the same quality of life?
We are very opposed to thinking of death, thinking of divorce, thinking of those conversations. We shy away from them. He's 24 and with no possibility of what the future looks like. So you can just see the downgrade of that lifestyle from having a nanny all your life to not having a home.
Don't just think about, the fact that they're family, because we normally say blood is thicker than water, but
It's not.
It's not.
Is your husband an alcoholic?
Yes.
Like, those things matter. Is your mother-in-law hostile? Like, those things matter.
Yes.
So date your lawyers. Date your lawyers. Let them know you. Let them like them. Find out if they are good human beings.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of Mama Zone. I'm your host, Ivy. And today we have another legendary guest here on set today. The one and only lawyer extraordinaire, right? Miss Waithera. Karibu sana Waithera.
Thank you.
Welcome for joining us on the podcast today.
Thank you so much.
This is going to be a very interesting podcast, particularly because of how it started behind the scenes. I'm very excited to see the direction we are going to take.
Yeah.
But karibu sana, maybe tell us a little bit about you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. My name is Waithera Mugo. I am a commercial and tax lawyer. I'm also a founder of Waithera Co Advocates and a new business coming soon. I help clients who are in business or in families or individuals protect their wealth. So I help them make business decisions that are legally sound, and I help them protect that wealth. So think of tax planning, think of representing you before Kenya Revenue Authority, representing you in court against a bad contract. So I do all that, and I'm so happy to be here. Thank you.
You heard, guys, we've brought you someone who can deal with KRA. Kumbukeni you so. You will need it somewhere.
Yeah.
But we are here having a discussion about parenting, particularly motherhood, and how the motherhood journey begins. When we're expecting a baby, we are all excited about names, about nurseries, about what kind of baby are we gonna have, what will they look like. What we don't really speak about is the legal side.
Yeah.
Right? It's almost taboo to have a discussion about what happens if we are not here.
Yeah.
We don't like to jinx ourselves as Kenyans and Africans as a whole. So I feel like this is a very timely conversation, especially around what you've just said. How do you protect what you have? How do you make sure the child that you're currently carrying, the child that you probably have already, the child that you're raising, should anything go wrong, God forbid, are protected and have the same quality of life that they would have had even if you're not there.
Yeah.
That's a discussion today.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can't wait.
I can't wait. Yeah. So that's what we're going to be discussing today. And I have a few questions. Why? Because hata mimi kusema ukweli, it's not something I thought about. Now, the reason why I thought of bringing you on board is because of my own journey. So I went in for a natural birth. Nikijiambia mimi ni mwanamume, mwanamke kai, mwanamke jameni, mwanamke, I can do anything. And I knew I was just going to go in, have the baby come out, and all was well. Certainty, or an assumption in my case. But things didn't go as planned. I ended up almost dying, and the probability was very slim of me not coming out of there with or without a baby. What would have happened to my child? Would they have carried on having the same quality of life? So these are some of the questions I want us to explore. So perhaps the first thing I would like to ask, from your perspective, every mom who is just about to give birth, what are some of the legal preparations they can have in place with with the mind that also, although we are hoping for the best, we need to plan for the worst. So what
Yeah.
are some of the things you would advise?
I think I like how you introduced in terms of African and Kenyan mindset. And there's a lot of grace around these conversations of planning because it's not our norm to plan. We are very opposed to thinking of death, thinking of divorce, thinking of those conversations. We shy away from them, and mainly because of the normalcy around the African context, around Kenyan context. I just want to put that as a disclaimer because just like any evolution that happens, even with taxes and with planning, there's this need for information of why should I plan, so that you can now shift from this is how we were born or this is how we've seen it done to I need to change it, right? So in my first years of practice, when I started my farm, one of the first cases that I handled was an 18-year-old boy. Well, he was 24 when he came to me, but when the mom died, he was 18. He was actually not 18, he was months to 18. And he had a very good life when the mom was alive. They were driving a Prado in 2016. He had a nanny his whole life, and he was in high school. He came for holidays, and the mom was unwell, working at a very good job, and the mom passed on in the house. And this boy is the one who had to go to the police station to report that my mom is no longer here.
Gosh.
And the insurance, the mom had a life insurance from the employer, whoever, whatever job she was doing then. So the insurance took advantage of whoever who reported the death, who was not an adult. And they, I don't want to say manipulated, but they did, manipulated the death certificate to say that this woman passed away from anemia. And the reason why they did that is because they wanted to use that as an exclusion to paying off the life insurance payout, which was 10 million. So let me give you a picture. The boy was 18. By the time he came to me, he was 24. He had to drop out of school. The relatives, no one was willing to take him up. Or if they did, it was not long time enough. So it would be shuffled from one home to the other. And he had to look for his dad. They were not together with the mom. So the dad was all the way in Uganda and already had, remarried. And he moved to Uganda. So he missed out on school. When he came to me, he had not joined uni. He's 24 and with no possibility of what the future looks like. So you can just see the downgrade of that lifestyle from having a nanny all your life to not having a home. We did win the insurance amount of 10 million plus interest in 3 years. But I think whenever I talk of planning, I think of that story because I saw how that boy was traumatized.
Yes.
Experiencing poverty for the first time without your mom.
Yes.
You can experience poverty with your family and you're like, we're in this together.
Yeah.
But experiencing it when you're experiencing grief is something else. So back to your question, I think having a child is truly a gift and it's such a big responsibility. And I think of planning as a love letter to your child, that you thought of them. You didn't want them to suffer. You planned ahead, which is your responsibility. And as much as you want to make sure that you keep the child alive with all the classes that you take, you also want to make sure that their future is kept alive with the desires that you had in the mind.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So planning, it's very important.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for putting it in that way, because the other element to this is your child is also your greatest investment.
Yeah.
Right? You have worked hard, you have done all these amazing things, and you want your child to be able to benefit from everything that every sweat you've put down all those years before they came. So practically speaking, where does planning begin? For me, in my experience, there's, of course, during the pregnancy, then of course, and I'm just trying to frame it for you so that you can be able to guide us through the steps. So there's of course, if you are a very proactive parent, like you, if you're a very proactive future parent, where would you start as a proactive future parent to pregnancy to when baby's here? What would that look like practically?
I think, especially when you discover you're pregnant, you only have 9 months. So it can be something you can condense because it's a journey. And there's also cost implications. So I would say, for example, I am not a mom yet. What have I done for myself is I've made sure that my assets are sitting properly in the structures that they should sit in. And if I was to do like a transfer of those assets, it's not as hard as if they were sitting in my personal name, right? And I'll explain that as we go when we're talking about succession planning structures. So I've made sure that things that I can take care of now, I've already taken care of them. Of course, I'm still stacking up assets, which we all do. But I think the job is incomplete if you're investing so much, but you're not thinking of why are you investing? If you're investing for your children, then you also have to think of how will they transfer to my kids? What is the most optimal structure of transferring? What is, cost effective? What does transfer look like? What taxes are involved in the transfer? So you have to start thinking of that, because I think in 9 months, when you're pregnant, you're not thinking about planning, right? And if that catches up with you and you find yourself you're pregnant, I think the simple questions start with, like someone said before we started shooting, if you go to hospital and don't come out, what does that look like? Who is responsible for your child? And in the modern world, we've seen parents who are not together legally, so they're not like married. So if your baby daddy, if we can use a hypothetical situation, is not in hospital with you and you've already brought forth a child to the world, who's responsible for that little human being? Did you choose a guardian? Did you have a will in place? Are your assets, ready to be transferred to this little human being when they are of age? So things like that. Yeah.
Okay, so there are a few things I've picked up from here, and even your previous conversation.
Yeah.
So we've talked about a life insurance policy. Maybe you can sort of speak into that as a sort of a cushion, an initial cushion, and why that's important. Maybe the bias you've seen in that. Then you've just talked about a will, right?
Yeah.
So I'd like you to touch on exactly what a will is and in Kenya, what that plays out looks like practically, because I think we also have an assumption that a will is instant.
Yeah.
So that's a good one.
Yeah.
Then you've also said something about a guardian. Who exactly is a guardian? What rights do they have in terms of this new person coming in with nothing, right? And needing all the protection in the world. So maybe those are 3 elements you can speak a little bit on.
Okay. Very good questions. Let me start with a guardian because it's a bit, straightforward. So guardianship, when you think of guardianship, you have to think of a minor. Like for you to nominate a guardian, then it means that there's a responsibility that is attached to a minor. And the way you do that is a simple document, like an agreement. Of course, the guardian must be aware and must accept. I think what I've seen in practice is people choose guardianship. First of all, guardian and godmother and godfather are very different, because guardian is the legal term. Godmother is the community term that we use. So when you're choosing a guardian, why are you choosing that guardian? And we spoke about it a little bit. It's like when you hold a baby, you can tell from the aura of, you and that baby, whether you are connected, right? I think you can't choose someone you've never seen them with your baby interact. So there's an element of chemistry. But most importantly, there's an element of merit. You want to choose someone who is competent, because when you think of your child, you're thinking of these financial decisions to be made. So you want to make sure you're choosing someone who's financially competent. If you think of your child, this is the life that you want for your child. Can that person understand that lifestyle? Because like if I take my daughter to the village, my mom will, instead of taking her to very expensive school, she better buy plots and then invest in her future. It's just, you have to look at, will this person execute the lifestyle that I want for my child?
Yes.
And most importantly, good faith eliminates at some point. Like people change, humans evolve. So I always advise people, have someone who oversees those responsibility. So have like a professional, like a lawyer, who's able to check, this is what Ivy wanted for her child. Is this what you as a guardian have been doing?
Yes.
So it's not just like abuse of power from the guardian perspective.
Yes.
I think anyone who is pregnant should give that a priority. Why? Because it's very simple. It's simply a document. You both sign. Someone witnesses it. You lodge it with your lawyer, and you already know there's that, certainty and safety of that. If anything happens to me, there's someone looking out for my child.
So is this guardian a parent, like a fellow parent, like for example your husband, your spouse?
Yeah.
Or should it be, in the event that you're covering, in the event both of you are not there, someone outside your immediate circle?
I would prefer someone outside because your spouse is an automatic.
Yes.
I don't think you need to tell your child's father that you have a father obligation to the child.
We hope
Well,
not.
some you do. But I think someone who is, and it's not a family or anything, it's someone that you trust.
So it should
can
not
be
be
anyone,
family,
as long as there are adults and they can get into a binding contract
and they are
to
willing to.
execute your roles, and they are willing to. Because
Yeah.
you can't choose a guardian who's
Yeah.
not said yes.
I think for me, that is a very important point you're making because,
Yeah.
as you said, a guardian is the legal term, but maybe commonly known, we call them godmother, godfather, right?
Yeah.
And I can tell you, in my experience, my godmother was an auntie. I think they chose her because of proximity,
Yeah.
right? And also because there's also some expectation in the family to keep
Things close and
yes,
neat.
and to be honest, I have seen no value in having this person in my life, right? In some instances, I even realized that we were incompatible. Why? Because maybe when my parents were appointing her to that position, there were a certain type of way. They thought they wanted their child to have a certain life. In my case, they thought that we were going to live in Kenya and, she would oversee my life in Kenya. But life happened that we moved to the United Kingdom and we changed. And our circumstances changed, our characters changed, our expectations changed, and we were no longer compatible, right? And so I wish someone had sat them down and said, for this particular position, what you've said, merit. Don't just think about, the fact that they're family, because we normally say blood is thicker than water, but
It's not.
And that they have a functional purpose, not a social purpose. So in the event something happens to you, they need to be able to execute this function to your standard, and that your child needs to be able to continue living the life that you hoped for them to live, right? So I think that is a fantastic distinction you've made for us to look at. The other element I did think about guardianship is beyond functional competency, integrity.
Yes. Oh my God, yes.
But that one still requires what you said, an overseer. Right?
Yeah, and maybe if I could mention, I think in everything that we discuss around here, whether it's a will, whether it's a guardianship arrangement, I think the power is in the contract. Because as a lawyer, when you come and tell me, this is my situation, I have one child, I want to choose person X, then I'm able to vet and anticipate and analyze what risks could happen in future that you might not be able to, because you trust this person. But lawyers, we don't trust. I will look at you as a guardian and I'll think, how can you abuse your power? And I'll make sure that you can't because of the contract. And if there's any gap that you can utilize, then I'll make sure that there are remedies of every, spaces or vacancies that you can utilize to abuse that power.
Yes.
So there's also, it's an arrangement is one thing, but also the power of the contract is the biggest factor to make sure that this works. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Now, what about the concept of life insurance? Again, based on what is a life insurance policy?
Yeah.
Why is that something we should consider, particularly as parents, whether we are incoming parents or current parents?
Yeah.
And how do we make sure we get a policy that does not look at that is practical and accessible to our child, unlike that gentleman the 24-year-old who the mom did all that, but still when the child needed it, he couldn't access it.
I think also the winning factor of that case was the contract. So I mean, forgive me for repeating this, but the power of the contract is the biggest winner for everything. And we were able to articulate that to court, and were able to show how amnesia, that whatever they use, I don't know what... Anemia was not the reason why she passed on. And even though it were, the contract was not providing for it.
Yes.
But back to your question, first of all, life insurance I think it's pretty simple from where I sit. You're going to die at some point. You have children. You want them to be paid or at least have some liquidity if you're not there. So taking it out is then thinking, who do you nominate to have the funds? Now, if your children are below 18 years, you don't want that money to go to them because sometimes it's a huge payout. So then you structure around how does it transfer to them? Who has oversight around it? And when we are going to trickle down, we're going to see every asset that you have, whether it's shares, whether it's property, whether it's life insurance, what is the best vehicle for you to put? And two factors: how fast can the kids access that? And do they need to go to court? What are the costs of access? And also, what restrictions do you want to put so that, because you can have a life insurance and then your 18-year-old is given, like if my client was 18 and he was given the 14 million, he wouldn't know what to do with it. And remember also, children are vulnerable to girlfriends, vulnerable to relatives. So the assignment is only complete when you're able to tell how the assets trickle down from you to the children with the middlemen. Yeah.
Okay. And now let's enter the world of succession, just to pick up from where you're talking about. So you are either pregnant or you are you're pregnant, you're about to deliver, or you have a child already, and you're looking to plan ahead to make sure that in the event something happens to you and your spouse, what you own finds its way to your children to the benefit of their life, right? Of course. So talk to us a little bit about succession planning, as in Kenya, what that looks like, what sort of structures are available, and how you would help them in your role as a lawyer to navigate through this, and the value of doing that against the biases we have as Africans. Yes.
Fantastic.
Right. And maybe let me just add on to that, right? And even the element of like someone like my dad who, and I'm calling him out, who does not want to write a will because the thinking is that it's a jinx that he will die because he is...
It's a thing, really.
Yes.
I don't get it.
He doesn't want to discuss passing on his wealth until he dies. So it's a very gray area. We have no idea what he has or what he doesn't have. Right,
Yeah. So one of the things that we have done in our farm is we've recognized a lot of Kenyans and Africans generally, they don't want to talk about death. So we've removed the concept of death from succession planning. And we've given it a term that I really like. It's called family governance. And the way we tell our clients is family governance is the same way you manage your business, like, corporate governance for your business, but now on a family level. So what does that look like? It looks like you still having the assets. So you still have control. They're not passing. They're not going to your beneficiaries when you're alive. No one is killing you for them. But then you're involving your beneficiaries in overseeing the assets when you're alive. Or you can also start distributing them if you want when you're alive. That way, you don't pass on. And most deaths are suddenly, unfortunately.
Yes.
And your children are interacting with your investments for the first time.
Yes.
And first of all, they are grieving. So there's not even the capacity to catch up, to run maybe your business or your investments. So what does family governance look like? So let me start with what we are familiar with, wills, right? So the Kenyan system is structured in two ways. You can die with a will. You'll be surprised how many people in Kenya, like we could count them, who die with a will. Very few. You could die with a will, or you could die without a will. Now, there's a TikTok video that I was circulating the other time in the seminar where someone was saying they didn't know that if someone dies, you have to know your chief, your area chief, or the person's, the person's chief.
Yes.
So when you die without a will, then you need to start from the chief. Like the chief needs to authenticate that person and say that I knew this person. I knew that he had this number of children, this number of wives, and so forth and so forth. But in the two instances, whether you have a will or you don't have a will, you still have to go to court, which is what we call the probate process. And the court has to look at the chief's letter in this case, when you don't have a will, or the will in this case, and confirm the contents of the will or confirm the contents of this letter for them to say, okay, now you can take over the property. Now that process, like the TikTok video we saw, is not a short process. In most cases, like that lady, she was saying the husband died in 2019. She was still in court in 2025. Those are about 6 years later, right? And I think what struck me is when she said 5 lessons that she's learned. Number one is when you're in court, it's virtual. So you're logged in with 100 others. So everyone knows your business. which sometimes, especially with assets, you don't want that out there.
True.
Another thing that she learned is when your person dies and you have to go to probate, everything that they own is at the mercy of the court. So it's upon the court to say, yes, you can touch that bank account, even though the bank account was joint, right?
Yes.
So what happens to your children and school fees?
And day-to-day living.
Yeah, and she said, like, for school fees, you have to take the fee structure, you have to do an application, and it's at the mercy of the judge
Whether
to say
they'll allow it or
you
not.
can pay school fees or you can't pay school fees. And remember, all these processes of going to court, you need a lawyer, right? Because you don't know how to make an application. So there are also costs involved. And I think to that extent, I always advise my client, the more you stack up your assets, the more you need to move away from probate. You need to move away from court. Especially if you have young children, you don't want for them to wait 5 years for them to access school fees.
True.
So what does that look like?
Yes.
Is, yes, you can have a will, because a will is less expensive, in my opinion, to draft it. But with time, you need to elevate that structure into a trust.
What is
so
a
that
trust?
you're able to avoid the probate process.
Okay.
Now, what is a trust?
Yes. We've watched a lot of movies.
Yeah.
Every time we come across the word trust, it's about fighting. And who is a trustee?
Yeah.
Why did the dad choose this guy? Right?
Yeah.
And it's always, I think it just seems like such a foreign concept. I think that's the right word.
Yeah.
So will, you've just to recap, will is, of course, it's a way for you to say, I want this to go this and this, but the practical execution of a will is cumbersome.
Yes.
You have to go to a court. The court has to say yes, no, yes, no, and your life can end up being brought to a standstill. I mean, in my case, funny enough, a family member, the dad died without a will. It's called intestate.
Yeah. So they had to go to the chief in that
Yes, we started there. The guy had to write, ask for all the IDs of all the children, the wives, and write in ballpoint, this person was the wife of the.
Yes.
And then I think it's only 7 years later.
Oh no.
The court finally granted them access to certain things. There's still other elements like shares and all those things that they've not had access to.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think they just reached a point they'd given up.
That's sad.
Yeah. So this is a true reality for many Kenyans. And thankfully they were adults. So they had their own families and they were running their own lives.
Yeah.
So were not depending too much on the inheritance. But I can only imagine Olive.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That
would be devastating.
That would be devastating.
7 years is a long time.
Right?
Like 7 years, your child was not talking. Your child is now forming full sentences.
Imagine, yeah.
If they've gone to school,
If
because
they've
there's
gone
no
to
school
school.
fees.
Yes, well, maybe they've moved from Brook House to now.
Don't name it, but yeah. Yeah. So what was the question?
Yes. Now, you're talking about trust as the alternative structure. And I'm mentioning that it's a foreign concept. So maybe you can start by educating us on what a trust is and why it's maybe the trade-offs, why it's a better option and what would be the trade-offs of getting a trust versus a will.
I think I would just first give a disclaimer. It's not a better option. It's a more advanced option. Because I think all options are good, depending on your circumstances, your capital capacity, your assets as well. Because the more assets you have, then the more need you have for succession planning. So if you have like 2 assets, then it doesn't make sense for you to go all the way, because also the cost kind of inform the process. Another thing that I realized I mentioned is the players of a will. So when you're drafting a will, you need to have, of course, your beneficiaries in mind, which is your children or whoever that you want to leave your assets to.
Yes.
You also need to have an executor. The executor should not be the beneficiary, because that's conflict.
Executor is a person who is supposed to execute your wishes.
Yeah, execute. I call them the wills prefect.
The wills prefect.
They look at, Ivy wanted Olive to have this car, and then they make it happen. And when you go to court, the court recognizes executors, and they're the ones who get the probate.
Is that the same as an
letters.
administrator? No.
So the administrator is when you don't have a will.
Oh.
It's the same function, but different terms,
Yes.
right?
So administrator, no will.
No will.
Executor, will.
With will, yeah. But in both processes, like when I could just, preliminary stage the processes, you go to court, you tell the court this person died. For example, I'm the executor, you're the administrator. We still have to wait for the court to confirm the contents. If there's someone who is disputing the will, for example, as an executor, some people will be like, the will was not signed by the deceased. Then you're looking
Forged
at,
signature.
a longer process.
Yes.
If you're an administrator and there are children from other families that are not captured in the chief's letter,
Yes.
again, there's a longer process.
Yes.
And I think the sad reality that we have in Kenya right now, despite the judiciary doing its best, that succession cases will take a long time.
Yes.
Like, we can't assure you it will take a year. That's being positive. It will take a long time. So whenever you decide to go that route, like I say, it nuances. Then you have to think of, will my children be okay in 1 year?
In the meantime, yeah.
To your second question, what is a trust? Now, a trust, like you said, it's a very foreign concept. In fact, it's not as foreign to the wealthy people in Kenya. I have not met any wealthy person who doesn't have a trust in place. And some of them have trusts from their grandfathers, meaning like they started them kitambo, who are living amongst us.
Yes.
You'd be surprised how many Kenyans even have trusts outside the country, like in Jersey and all that. What is a trust? So a trust, think of a trust like a company, because it's an entity by itself. And there are different types of trust. Like, you can have a family trust where you want to use that entity for purposes of succession planning. You can have a charitable trust where you want to use it for non-profit. There are different types of trusts. So for purposes of family trusts, the players are, number one, Ivy, who's putting things in the trusts, and we call them a settler. So you're settling things in the trust. And then there's the trustees. So think of Waithera as a lawyer. You're giving me the mandate in the trust to oversee the operations, if we can call them, of the trusts. So if I need to transfer property, if there's any money coming in the trusts, the trustee is responsible for that.
Okay.
You can have as many trustees as you want.
Really? Running?
But of course, there's chaos in a lot of numbers because of decision making.
Yes.
But you don't have to have one or two. You can have many, because remember, family governance. So think of the same way you have like a odd number of directors, you can also have like an odd number. Trust is so advanced that when you're bringing on trustees, it can't be your mom. It needs to be, again, the merit that we're speaking on. Like, you want to make sure that someone can understand contracts that are coming into the trust.
Yes.
So you get a lawyer.
Yes.
You want to make sure that there's annual audit being done in the trusts every year.
So
you get an auditor. You want to make sure that there's someone who has like Kofi Annan characteristics. So you get a dispute resolution. So it's very strategic. Yeah. Of course, it's also expensive, because if you're hiring me to work in your trusts, then there's a fee applicable.
Yes.
So it's different from a will, in the sense that executor, you don't have to pay them. But in most cases, trustees, especially high level, you need to pay them. Then, of course, there's the beneficiaries. Now, what is the beauty of a trust in Kenya? A trust is more advanced than a company for purposes of succession planning, in this sense. Number one, it has liability protection.
Okay.
So in Kenya, if I went to court and sued you for, like, you owe me money, and you have a company, Ivy Limited, I can try to pursue you, and then I realize, hey, Ivy as person doesn't have any assets. Then I can go back to court and tell the court, Ivy doesn't have assets, but Ivy Limited, which is linked to Ivy, was involved in this debt scenario, and I want to lift the veil. That's what we call it in law. I want to lift the veil so that I can get my money from Ivy Limited.
Yes.
Now, in a trust level, you can't do that. A trust is like protected. So creditors can't come after the trust, because it's for purposes of family. That property is for succession purposes, so they can't touch it. There's also tax benefits that are involved in a trust. Now, when you hire a smart tax lawyer like myself, you're able to tax plan to make sure that there's no tax that is in the trust level.
Yes.
And the operations are done maybe in the company level. And so the trust is so seamless in terms of it's a holding entity for purposes of transfer.
Yes.
The other beautiful thing about a trust is the governance element. So to give you a scenario, assuming you have like 3 homes, and you have 2 children, and you want home 1 to go to your child when she's 25, and then home 2 to go to your other child when maybe they are 20, maybe they are more responsible. So the 25 one is feeling some type of way about your decision, and they want to transfer this home to themselves. Now, if you had written a will and you passed on, there's no mechanism of, you can say that the house will go to them when they are 25. But if you died when they were 2, will your executor still be willing to wait until they are 25 for them to do this transfer?
True.
So you can see the dynamics,
Yes,
right?
yes.
But in trust level, because it's a trust deed, it's a constitution, the property can't go to them before they're 25. And then because for you to put assets in a trust, the way we do it in our farm, we want to put it in a corporate way. So it's not just the home that is sitting there. So assuming the home is sitting there by the company. So you have to also think of the corporate governance around it, meaning shares have to transfer. There has to be a directors meeting. There has to be a resolution.
Yes.
So you can't just do fraud
There's
and
no
transfer the property.
immediate,
And I
a
think
process has to be
Kenya,
followed.
we've seen a lot of fraud with inheritance. In fact, a friend of ours was just telling us how the uncle was unwell and he was very wealthy for like 3 months. And by the time he came out of hospital, his children had transferred most of his assets to themselves. And he was so broke, he couldn't even afford airtime.
Gosh.
So it's sad. It's really sad. But I think as much as you're making money in Kenya and you're having assets, you have to complete the journey. You have to complete it. You have to make sure that, you trust them, yes. But what are the processes?
What are the
there
processes?
gates that they can't, jump?
Are there safeguards? Yeah. So a trust, beyond just property, can you put in what can you put in a trust beyond just the basic property?
So
or
good
land?
question. You can put anything. I would say anything in a trust, but the problem, the key is how you put it. So like I like talking about Jenga Karome Trust because we've seen it play out. And I think the idea of the trust was really beautiful from where he was sitting. But I think the way it was structured was wrong in the sense that they put in most of the assets in the trusts, and then there was no delineation of what governance is each asset managed by. So going back to the story, the hypothetical scenario I gave of a home, if you put a home directly in the trust and this home, for example, has rental income coming in, rental income has a tax implication. Who's paying for that tax? If you put it in a company level, it means that this management, so think of it like a big business,
Yes.
this management at the company level,
Yes.
and only the profit or dividends go to the trust.
True.
So that all operations are coming to the company.
Yes,
If
to
an
keep it going.
employee sues the business,
Yes.
they won't sue it at a trust level. They'll
Yes.
sue it at a company level.
Yes.
So there's a lot of nuances with structuring. And that's why, again, you need to have like a really good commercial team and a good tax team so that you don't just bundle things in the trust. And then you realize that the trust can also be sued because it can be sued. In as much as it has liability protection, if there is, relationship of the contract was between the trusts and this third party, then they can sue you. Yeah. So there's a bit of planning around that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of practical steps, what would you say someone who has none of these things in place, where should they start?
Yeah. I think I like doing consultations first. And it's like, I think of it like when you go to the doctor and you're thinking, Kenya, we also like diagnosing. You're going to tell the doctor, I have sore throat, I have flu, I think it's COVID.
I checked online.
I checked online. ChatGPT says it's COVID.
ChatGPT says I'm dying.
So I like to do a consultation first
Yes.
because then I'm able to understand practical dynamics, like how many children do you have? Are you married? Do you have a spouse? Are you okay with your spouse? You'll be surprised how many things that you might not think matter in your succession planning, but they do.
Yes.
In as small as, is your husband an alcoholic?
Yes.
Like, those things matter. Is your mother-in-law hostile? Like, those things matter. So I'm able then to look at your situation and structure something that works for you.
Yes.
It varies, like I said, especially on cost purposes, because one of the things we also try to do is we don't want to overwhelm our clients with costs. So we're able to work with you from where you are. So if you have like 2 assets, we come in, we're able to tell you, when you start this way, then the money makes sense for your assets. If you have 20 assets, the money makes sense for your 20 assets.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So consultation
is the first step. Okay.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And what else do you think we would need to be aware of as we navigate through this? Because of course, in some cases, now let's talk about, of course, there's me as a mom and I want to protect my child's future.
Yeah.
But then I come from a family and they also have their own assets, and especially around inheritance and having maybe the older generation who are very skeptical about this element of succession.
Yeah.
How would you advise we go about having these discussions with, because you see, we are looking at it from the perspective of a young child, but even in preparation for maybe our older parents who are aging and ideally they're getting to a stage where they need to get their affairs in order, but it's taboo conversation to have.
Yeah.
How would you advise for us to be able to navigate through that in a way that what you said, we don't harp on about death. We harp on about the importance of family governance. What tips would you give us?
I think this is actually more human than legal. I think it's first of all understanding where they're coming from.
Yes.
It's very interesting. I see younger people, not really our generation, but younger people being entitled to things that you'd never worked for. So I think first of all appreciating that
Okay.
those are not your things, they're not your entitlement.
Yes.
It's a gift and it doesn't have to come to you, right? Like your parents could decide that, vibes, I'm gonna sell everything and go to Maldives. It's nothing you can do about it.
Absolutely, and it's their right.
So first of all understanding that. So there's a level of respect and that you need to have even when you're having this conversation with them. There's also a level of appreciating that they've been able to accumulate these assets. And you need to remove, as a child, yourself from how does it benefit you if they do this structure to how does it benefit them. I think that's where the conversation goes wrong. Because the moment you start telling them, you're 70, what they're hearing is you're dying. So if you change the narrative to that, if anything happened to you, like your business right now, and all these assets are sitting in your personal capacity, they could be, recovered or enforced against you, right?
Yes.
So how is the advice valuable for them at where they are?
Yes.
Then number 2 is, how do you communicate that control will still be on them?
Yes.
Because they have a problem with you not just telling them they are dying at 70, but you're also telling them, write a will or transfer these assets to me.
Yes.
So you need to echo that, the way you can use a trust, and you can still actually be the trustee.
Yes.
So you can be the settler and you can be the trustee.
Yes.
And the trigger, according to the trust deed, is only going to happen if you pass away. It's more of planning as opposed to transferring.
Yes.
I think that's very important.
Yes.
And I think last but not least is patience, because there's a lot of painful stories around how they acquired these assets, hard work. So it's not a conversation that you have on Monday and you expect them to enforce on Sunday.
Yes,
so I think patience, and the best one is if you remove yourself from the situation and direct them to a lawyer, then it becomes advisory as opposed to you trying to manipulate, as they see it, the situation.
Yes.
There's a lot of power in independent advisory.
Yes.
Because then if I'm talking to your dad, I don't stand to benefit anything from him planning his affairs, and I'm able to articulate that to him, and I'm using the law as an anchor.
Yes.
So I'm not just telling him what I feel. It's not emotive. It's actually a comprehensive conversation.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I've had lawyer come up quite a few times.
Yeah.
And of course, you are the go-to lawyer, especially around this. You've shown you clearly know your stuff.
I do.
But I'm sure there are a lot of Kenyans out there who feel like they have lawyers. They're already on hand.
Yeah.
How can they know they have the right person? And the reason I'm asking this is the other day in the Nation newspaper, I think I saw you post it.
Yeah.
There was a whole ad.
Yeah.
Two sisters, right?
Yeah, I posted that. Yeah.
Discussing how their lawyer has just come in and completely started finding loopholes to almost transfer their dad's inheritance to them as the lawyers, right?
Yeah.
Because they know the law, they can take advantage of it.
Yeah.
I think that was the something along the line.
Well, actually, they were on their lawyer's side.
But
they had a popular property that parties wanted to get.
Yes.
And basically, I think their lawyer's name was implicated in it. And they were confirming that this was their father's lawyer. And any instructions that the lawyer was doing was coming from them.
From the father.
Yeah.
So that was actually on the
was
positive.
a good lawyer.
Okay, so
They're
now
good
on
lawyers.
the negative, they're good lawyers. Can you believe that? They're good. Yes, there's one here. There's one here in flesh and blood. So on the negative side, where you might have a lawyer who has identified some loopholes And of course, they're not gonna
Yeah.
tell the beneficiaries. They're going to find a way to take advantage of these loopholes.
Yeah.
How can you sort of give us an advice on how to get the right person, someone like a Waithera, if not
Yeah.
Waithera?
Yeah.
Yes.
It's a good question. I think the way I think about law as, an occupation, I think of it like dating. You need time
With
to
a
know your
lawyer.
lawyer. Yes. You'll be surprised because think of it, Ivy. You're trusting this human being
Yes.
with your life's hard work.
Yes.
And it's no longer business, to be honest. It's if I'm sitting down and thinking about your child, it can't be business for me. It has to be I'm really invested in your child's well-being.
Yes.
So I feel like you need to know your lawyer in a personal capacity, because if you're trusting this person that if you die, they're the ones who are going to meet your family and tell your family what you
want.
wanted.
Yes.
Like, it's so intimate,
Yes,
right?
yes, you're right.
And I think what also makes me the best for this is, well, other than my good qualities as a human being, I have an understanding of tax. And there's a big element of tax in any succession planning.
Yes.
So, for example, and I really wanted to mention this, if your property is sitting in your name and you want to pass it to your child,
Yes.
then there's exemption that happens there. Most people sometimes don't know about it. If you have property sitting in a family-owned company and they are moving to a third party who's not in your family tree, and when I say family tree, I mean nuclear, there's a 4% stamp duty. 4% is a big number. So think of if the property is 20 million, 4% of that is 800,000. So there's a bit of planning that comes in, and it can't just be contracts. There has to be a tax element. Now, what makes a good contract is what I mentioned earlier, the relationship. Because for me to write a good contract for you, I need to put myself in your shoes. I need to anticipate your needs, and then I need to capture those needs in the contract.
And that can only happen through us knowing each other, right?
Yes. So date your lawyers. Date your lawyers. Let them know you. Let them like them. Find out if they are good human beings.
Test
because
them.
the flags are always there.
Yes.
Like, someone doesn't just wake up in the morning and decide, I'm going to transfer Ivy's Runda home to myself. The flags, if you're paying attention, the flags are there.
Yes.
Yeah. So if there's no integrity, then that's not the right person.
So we're going to do something a little bit differently in this next segment. We are going to invite my team to ask questions to Waithera, because this is turning out to be a very hot topic.
Yeah.
And they're most welcome. So you will hear voices anonymously to protect their identities, because what they may say may or may not be used against them in future or in the court of public opinion, as I've been told, or in WhatsApp groups. So karibu sana, guys. Feel free. The floor is yours.
My first question is, how small is too small when thinking about setting up a trust?
That's a good question. I think I would say small is relative. And I think you can't call any assets that is yours small to begin with, because it's yours, whether it's one asset or two. I would say let costs inform your decision. So, for example, if you have like one car and you have like 2 cameras, what is the cumulative cost of that asset? And if you're going to draft a will, to be very clear on which of your children or which of your beneficiaries get these 2 assets is a portion of that, then why not, right? So cost is a big factor to inform how small is small, but I don't think there's anything small as long as you own it. Because if you're thinking about it, then it means you're worried whether there's clarity on who it goes to. Yeah.
My question was on choosing whether we or a trust, and the person who's settler in this case could be having a condition like a mental condition, like
Yeah.
is that situation.
So in that situation where the settler is the one who owns the assets, right? If I got it right. So there's something we call a power of attorney, and how it works, it can be big functions or small functions. So for example, if Ivy wants me to take care of Olive for like 2 weeks and make all the decisions around Olive, she can give me a power of attorney for that particular function. If Ivy sees that her mental health or illness is taking a dive, she can give me a futuristic power of attorney to be like, from 2026, Waithera will be responsible for carrying out all my functions, bank, assets, and all that. So for someone who's going through that, you can do a power of attorney where they appoint the donee, the person who takes that power, to execute things that they could have done for themselves. And what we've seen in Kenya, like people living abroad, they give powers of attorney all the time to people in Kenya to like sell their properties. And then you're able to do all the functions, including signing transfer deeds on behalf of that person in their absence. The trick comes in if this person didn't give the power of attorney and then they fall sick. So that now you have to go to court. You have to prove that indeed they're not capable or functional to make these executive decisions. And then now the court can help you navigate how to get that power. But in most cases, a power of attorney should work. Yeah.
What are the limitations of the power of attorney?
The one that comes to mind is abuse. So because again, human beings, you give them one power, they want to stretch it. So the way we do it in our farm is we make sure that the power of attorney is as clear as possible in terms of what are the functions of this deed. So if I've told you to sell my car, and maybe I have 10 cars, I'm going to articulate exactly what car you're selling. How many months do you have to make this decision? What do you do with the money when this power lapses? And what you also can't do. And there's a clause that I really like that says that everything that you do has to be legal. So that's very binding. So if you do anything that I didn't tell you, that skips to illegality. So the power of the document again, the clauses are able to articulate what power that, you can operate within. Yeah.
And for the family WhatsApp groups, can someone have power of attorney after the settler is deceased?
For the WhatsApp group,
this one is directed at them. So
can you have power of attorney after the
death of
the death?
person?
No.
Power of attorney for me after I have passed away.
No. So the way power of attorney works, first of all, both parties have to be alive. The person who's giving the power and the person who's receiving the power. So the person that is giving the power, who's donating, that's what we call it, is called a donor. And the person who's receiving the power is called a donee. So you can't give when you're not there, So you do have to be alive. It can't work after. Yeah.
No ghost business. Mr.
Yeah.
Asha, ulikuwa na swali jameni. Wacha tusikie sauti yako hata kidogo.
I don't know if my question is relevant.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's going to happen, but let's say in case of both the trustee passes away and the one who's been given the trust also passes away, what happens to that?
So the trustee passes away and the beneficiary passes away. Okay, so we anticipate that. So first of all, trustees, I said you can have more than one.
Yes.
So in fact, the way we do it in our farm, on top of a trustee, we have someone called a protector. So we're able to make sure that even the trustee is having to report to someone. So again, to constrain that, abuse of power. So a protector is someone professional. So think of like a lawyer. So I'm able to look at the trust deed and see what was the intention of the settler. And if anything that was not captured in the trust deed, what is the legal way to navigate that instance, like what you've just mentioned. So if the trustee dies, then there's a clause that protects and makes sure that we can appoint someone else on his behalf. Or if there are other existing trustees, then we can maybe appoint someone else to, make sure that there is an odd number to it for decision making, or they can function as they are, right? Now, if a beneficiary dies, it means that there's no one for this to go to, right?
Yes.
So again, that is something else we anticipate because the beneficiary might have died, but they have children.
Yes.
So that can go to them. Or the beneficiary might have died, but there's another beneficiary existing.
Yes.
So that can go to them. So these are all questions that we anticipate and we ask the settler. Yeah.
So how do then...
That's a good question, but it's very relevant. Yeah.
We hear a lot about unclaimed assets. How does the government end up with a huge pile of unclaimed assets in Kenya?
So you remember when we started the conversation and saying, as a society, African, Kenyan, planning and us, even taxes, most people will be filing their taxes on 30th June, on the D-Day. This is something that we have a problem with planning.
Yes.
So, And the government doesn't mind in the situation for unclaimed assets, because it means if you have you've acquired a lot of properties and you've not written a will, you have no one knows of your family, like, you've talked about someone close to you who you don't know all their assets. The government has no business to come looking for
who it belongs to, who is the rightful owner. Yeah.
In fact, I heard of a very funny front thing that is happening in Rwanda, where someone dies and they have a home. No one knows their family member. Maybe they are like, an expert or something. People in the vicinity, like, they're always reporting this house, the person died. They will come and forge documents and sell that property to a third party. And because there's no one to claim it, right?
Gosh.
So if you look at the repercussions of not planning, if you really look at them, it's you're saving X amount of fees, which is a percentage of the assets. And you are exposing all your assets because you just refuse to plan.
Yes.
Unclaimed assets, they go to an agency in the government. It's a whole agency operational. And even getting the assets because they are unclaimed, proving that you actually are supposed to get them, is a whole process. And of course, also costly, right? So all that to say, the beauty of planning and having a will or having a trust, or just letting your children know these are the properties I have. And one more thing that we didn't discuss, gift inter vivos. So you can give your children assets when you're alive. You don't have to wait until you pass on. So if you have like 10 houses, you can decide, I want to see how you manage house one, and you transfer that in your lifetime. And also there's a tax benefit of doing that, There's also joint ownership where you co-own the property with your child, so that if you die, it automatically transfers to your child. So there's no transfer element, there's nothing.
They don't have to go to court.
So there's so many tools of structure, wealth planning, but the only way you know them is you hire a lawyer.
You
and you pay.
A Waithera.
Yeah.
Yes. Do we have any other questions in the audience? Wonderful. Guys, you are... Mko sawa, Eric? Iko kwa kichwa? Sawa.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for your time. If we want to find you, because of course we want to find you after this. How do we go about
it? So my name is Waithera Mugo in all platforms. LinkedIn, Waithera Mugo. Instagram, Waithera Mugo. I run Waithera MN Co-Advocates. We're in Westland Square, the building that is just next to KFC or Art Cafe. And like I said, I like beginning my client relationship with a consultation, because we also choose our clients. We don't take all clients. So we're very particular.
Fancy.
We need to align, because what we do is not easy.
Yes.
It's very personal.
Yes.
And
it requires a level of intimacy and trust.
Yes. So it those would be nice platforms to follow us.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, guys, for joining us for another episode of Mama Zone. I am looking forward to seeing you again next time, and I hope you've learned something. I hope you're going to learn how to plan going forward. Asanteni sana. Thank you very much for joining us for yet another episode of Mama Zone. Please share, subscribe, cheer, cry, do everything in between, and we'll see you next time.